Gary Russell Jr., Washington, D.C.'s, one of Washington, D.C.'s finest, I suppose, defending his featherweight title. I believe he's defending one. Another one's up for grabs. I think IBF, IBO, one of the two is up for grabs. Against
IBO is not a recognized title, okay? This is his title, WBC on the line.
Fair enough. Technically, there's another belt that you could win. Against this guy's name I cannot pronounce, King Tug, as he's known, Olympic silver medalist. This will be on Saturday on Showtime live from Pennsylvania, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West. I got to tell you, Brian, I actually love this fight.
It's a good fight.
Because the criticism of Gary Russell Jr. is not that he's not talented, or even a bit of a showman coming out with the caveman bit that he's been doing, the whole Crudes thing. He's actually quite talented. He is, I think, somebody that people really want to invest in. And the Jojo Diaz fight in 2018, I think, was surprisingly competitive. Let's put it that way, right? But in general, if there's a criticism of his featherweight reign, this is the mandatory defense. The criticism has been, my man's doing just enough to do just enough.
Oh, he's appearing once a year for that mandatory defense.
That is it. And he's not taking on guys that people really want to see him in there and challenging himself and getting after that. Now, I don't know if King Tug from Mongolia is that guy we're going to end up seeing. But all indications are that he could be. This guy blew through the ranks to get to this spot much easier than folks had anticipated. As I mentioned, he's got the amateur pedigree, and he is an all-action, all-business, heavy-handed kind of fighter who's not just a puncher. He can box as well. Now, I'm not saying he's the boxer that Gary Russell Jr. is, but I got to tell you, this is the first time in a while that I've looked at one of Gary Russell Jr.'s fights on paper, and I've been like, well, okay, it's the mandatory, and in that sense, you know, he's sort of sleepwalking through it. On the other hand, this is just the kind of mandatory for me to go, all right, Gary Russell, you got your hands full.
This has that potential to be one of those great sneaky trap fights. And if there's any sort of defense of Gary Russell, he's always had hand problems. So the time off, only fighting once a year, has fully allowed him to rest and be up to his best. It's not acceptable, though, in 2020 for a guy of that talent level to only fight once a year. Him getting a fight this early in the calendar year, Luke, seems to be a smart move if he wants to fight 2 and 3 times in a crowded division and really have the potential to stand out at being the best. But why you have to love this matchup? Yes, Gary Russell's going to have the insane speed advantage. His hand speed is off the charts. He puts it on you, punches and bunches. But King Tug, Tugstsogt, Nyambayar, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Something like that, yes.
While he is your standard, aggressive, hard, heavy-handed brawler coming at you, the fact that he has that amateur pedigree in that background, being a Mongolian silver medalist at the 2012 games, shows that he can do it smartly. He can do it in a way that can cut off the ring and set up. And if he can get Gary Russell Jr. into a brawl, then you want to go back and rewatch the tape of that Jojo Diaz fight, where Russell dominated early, but then tried a bit too hard to get Diaz out of there, right. And suddenly that became a real fight for a few rounds. This is a very interesting spot, because if Gary Russell Jr. can dominate and really set the pace and the tone and control the terms of the fight, this could be a spectacular win that would lift him to fighting 2 or 3 times this year. And you can hear him in the past year finally call out the big names. Say, I want Leo, I want Gervonta, I want anybody around my weight class. I'll go up to 35 if I have to. Those are the words you want to hear from a guy this talented. But you got to get through this test first. And King Tug, I know that may have been your nickname in high school, some lonely nights
Only
there.
In the bathroom.
King Tug, this is just his 10th pro fight. This is one of those guys who is daring to be great right now, is not going to be afraid, is going to empty that tank. We could see some interesting theater when we know what could be at stake in the future. Jojo Diaz, the aforementioned guy, this past Thursday on DAZN in Miami, won a title from Tevin Farmer, survived a really vicious cut.
Albeit somewhat controversially.
There's business to be made in and around 26. There's a lot of fun fighters. A lot of them have moved up to 130. Right around there, you want to see a lot of big names get together. Gary Russell needs to be in that conversation. We need to find out how great he could be. Luke, just that one loss to Vasily Lomachenko, he showed incredible
Which, by the way, was
what,
a majority decision?
And he hung in there and really took some heavy shots and kept coming.
But the problem is, since then, he just has not put his foot on the gas. 2 more notes about that event. By the way, Guillermo Rigondeaux is back against Laborio Solis.
Oh, yeah.
So apparently Rigondeaux wants to, change the way another guy who lost to Lomachenko, and then everyone was kind of like, fuck this guy, because he kind of quit, I think you could say. Again, people got the whole Stephen A. Joe Rogan thing wrong, being like, oh, you can't say a fighter quit. Well, you can when they there's good evidence that they did.
And he moved up 2 weight classes for that one.
Fair
When
enough.
He realized he
and
was
he's
out of it,
older. He's like 37, 39.
he gave a FU to the media. He was just basically like, you want to say all these bad things about me? Here you go. I'm walking away.
And
no
he
boss.
didn't. So like you can say it when there's enough evidence to conclude that. It's just Stephen A. Smith's totally out of his depth. The point being on this one is that's another element to this card. Secondly, I would say I always love these time off fighters because you're always like, ooh, Floyd took a lot of time off, man. He might be rusty. And then he comes back and just schools these fools, right? On the other hand, there are other fighters who take time off and they don't have their time and they don't have their rhythm. And also, I also get the sense with Gary Russell Jr. a little bit, maybe he is taking time off for the hands and for other issues. He's a little bit complacent. He's a little bit like, I'm just better than these guys. I'm not saying he's not training hard. That's not what I'm saying. I think he's a serious professional. On the other hand, mentally, if you just know that all you have to fight is the mandatory guys, are you really geared up to the right frame of mind? If you're active, I suppose it doesn't really matter too much. If you're inactive and you have to come back just for the mandatory against a guy whose nickname is King Tug, for crying out loud, just a masturbator in chief, what are you really going to do? So to me, it's going to be very interesting to see how he manages that time off against the challenger who has all the hunger in the world.
And shout out to old Rigondeaux, because that's where we're at right now. He's got a title fight against Laborio Solis in that co-main event. Old Rigondeaux at, 38, 39, he's lost just enough of a step where he's got to stand in that pocket and brawl. Did you see that fight with Julio Ceja? That was all action all the time. We've always said what would happen when Rigo finally slowed down and had to be in there because he hits hard and he's got a flash chin. You can knock him down, but he digs in and fights. Remember that fight he had on New Year's Eve in Japan a couple years ago against that real tall dude? He got dropped twice. He got back up and finished him, broke the guy's face.
Oh, yes.
This guy's he can let it go when he has to.
Yeah. He's a tough bastard.